If you are a fan of the islands of Hawaii, whether you live there or whether you've visited there in the past and you fall in love with it like everybody else who has visited there before, including myself, you are going to want to listen to this episode. There is a water crisis in the islands of Hawaii, and we're going to talk about it today. We're going to talk about how the climate change crisis is not helping, how the military is not helping, and how tourism is not helping. And it may impact you whether you want to go there to visit again, and whether you are going to be, impacting them by using up their water. We're going to talk about that on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Liu, and this is the podcast where you find out what's happening with the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, and what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. And on today's episode, we're going to be talking about the water crisis that is happening in the chain of islands of Hawaii. They are on the verge of a greater catastrophe, according to locals, as the water crisis continues. I am going to link to a CBS article that I found this on, and it was a video, 25-minute video that I watched about the water crisis. Hearing from native Hawaiians who are absolutely disgusted and disappointed by the water crisis and how it's come to this, to be honest, how they're worried about farming, they're worried about water quality, they're worried about water quantity, and it gives you information of how fresh water is collected on the islands of Hawaii. Now, this is, we're looking at a chain of islands that are beautiful, just absolutely gorgeous. People will flock there. Millions of people flock there every year to visit the islands. It's a dream for a lot of people. As a scientist myself, a marine biologist, it's a dream to go there. I've been there once before. It was absolutely stunning. And it was just, something that is on the bucket list for many people, just like the Great Barrier Reef is on the bucket list for many people, especially marine biologists. You want to go there and you want to see the fish, you want to see the landscape, you want to see just the beauty and the heat, of course, the sun and everything. But obviously, over the last year, we've been learning more about Hawaii, especially after the devastating wildfires that happened August 9th, 2023, where, the island of Maui was devastated, Lahaina was devastated. People lost their lives. People lost their properties that they've had for generations. They lost a lot of land, and the recovery is going to take probably decades, if not more, to really get over, not only just from a property standpoint and a monetary standpoint, but also from a mental standpoint of the people who had to go through that and take their families into the ocean and for safety because there's so much fire and they couldn't get away from it. And when we look at what caused it, we look at, it was an electrical fire that had to do with the telecommunications, my understanding, or the electricity, the hydro cables, my understanding is, and then, because the drought that they've been in for years has left everything so bone dry that some of the foliage just went literally like wildfire. Right? It just caught and it just didn't stop until it reached seemed like the coast. And so many people lost their lives. So many people had their lives changed forever. And it was absolutely devastating. And more, there's been a focus on bringing about information on sort of the islands and their state before as well as after the wildfires. And this CBS sort of spotlight, I guess, or story really focuses on what was happening before the wildfire, before the pandemic, when they were looking at how water was used and how it was being used wastefully for the tourism industry, and how there's been historic contamination in certain spots due to military jet fuel. That's really what it comes down to. And as well as I think it's called PFAS, which is like a chemical used as a fire deterrent, right? So it's puts out fires, but that was leaked into the water quality, the water system. And so drinkable water, potable water was used, and it affected so many people's health, as well as mental health. And, you just can't get over that. It's really difficult to get over that. And unfortunately, it's happened more than once. And, even though there's been assurances from the Navy that this wasn't going to happen again, it happened again and again and again, and it might still continue to happen. That's what a lot of water resource analysts and water resource professionals are saying in Hawaii. They're worried that this is going to happen over and over again. And I want to get the story out to you, the audience members here, because oftentimes we just don't think about it when we look at sort of the climate crisis that we're in, especially when we're looking at islands and we talk about native groups, so indigenous groups that have lived on these islands for generations, especially in the Pacific, but everywhere else as well. But especially what we found out from the Pacific, the amount of trauma they've had from colonialism, the amount of trauma they've had from, the navies coming in and taking over and taking their land, the amount of, contamination, and how they are not in control of their islands, of their ancestral grounds. They are not in control of many of that. Then you have climate change, which when you're on an island, you're already, at risk of things. Let's be honest, without climate change, water is an issue, right? When you're living on an island surrounded by the ocean, drinkable water is an issue. In Hawaii, they talk in this short film, they talk about how they collect water, and it's collected through rainfall. It goes through the mountains, and it comes down. It's collected below the mountains, like 2,000 feet below the mountains, or 2,000 feet because of the mountain height, and it goes all the way down, trickles down. It's almost like every 25 years. So they were talking about how rain will fall on somebody, and they'll say, yeah, in 25 years, somebody will drink that water that has fallen today. Right? So if rain fell today, in 25 years from now, it will actually be beneficial to somebody who's drinking the water, because that's how it's collected. Right? So they have only rainfall to collect it. It goes into the groundwater, goes into the aquifers, and they use those aquifers to regenerate the water that goes through to homes and for farming and so forth, and use of potable water. Basically, drinkable and usable water for human beings. So you have, just from that perspective, you expect rainfall to happen. You look at Hawaii and what we know of Hawaii, even if you don't know a lot about it, which I only know a little bit about, you got rainforest. You got, dense rainforest that will allow, the collection of rain for a long period of time, which allows that ecosystems to sort of regenerate water over and over and over again through rainfall, which is important, right? But if you don't have rainfall because of the climate crisis, then you are in trouble. You're already in trouble, right? You have to collect water. That water needs to be, used for people so that they can have drinkable water, clean, drinkable water, and it has to be sustainable, it has to be regenerative. Just in like if your weather patterns change or the amount of rain changes, you're in trouble. And climate change does that, just that, right? It changes the wind patterns. And so their crosswinds have changed and their rainfall has changed. They've been in a drought for the last number of years, and that's affecting the amount of water that they can actually grab. So just with climate change in itself is, hurting the amount of water that is coming through, right? They don't have as much water coming through, so they can't drink as much water. Then you have, on top of that, you have the direct. So this is like an indirect human consequence. Now you have direct human disturbances where you have tourism. The tourism business in Hawaii, because everybody visits there and people fall in love with it, is huge. So you have hotels, right? You have paving of areas and development of areas so that people can come and be able to, quote unquote, enjoy. So you have a lot of stores. You have like a downtown with sky rises and huge hotels and everything that's developed along the coastline. There's a lot of development going on, so that means there's some areas with development and construction, if it's not managed properly, where you have contamination of water just in your regular water, like the river systems and your ponds and so forth. In the video, they talk about that. They talk about how there's sort of the last, good quality pond has already been turned into from water clarity and quality to brackish water systems because of the sediment that comes down from construction. It was watching people talk about this that have been taking care of it for centuries. Their families have been taking care of it for centuries, and to see the emotions that come out of them when they talk about the last remaining sort of sanctuary of water, the fresh water on the island is being contaminated. It's devastating to watch. I can't even just imagine what the people are going through over there, right? And we look at, in the video, they highlight one hotel having the largest freshwater wave pool, in Hawaii, on the island of Oahu, right? In a tourist spot. Basically, it's attached to a hotel, and people are going there and they're surfing on it and everything like that. And as one indigenous woman describes, she's like, "We're on the ocean. You get some of the best, waves around. People flock to Hawaii for some of their waves, and you are using their fresh water, their potable fresh water, which they're already in a crisis, to surf on water, like regular, just on fresh water. How does that make sense? How is that allowed? And how, like, when everybody else is having trouble, like the farmers are having trouble, the people are having trouble with their water quality and water quantity, yet these hotels are allowed to put in the biggest wave pool. I just don't understand, other than, corruption of some sort, right? The tourism agencies are getting, the tourism hotels and stuff are getting more money for what they get. And maybe they support a campaign or something like that. But how, like, other than that, how is this allowed? How is this allowed when you're looking at a water quality crisis in Hawaii? Now, I don't know how the politics work in Hawaii, but if it works like anywhere else in the world, especially when it comes to indigenous people, the indigenous people never get the good side of this sort of deals, right? It just doesn't happen. And, that is just disappointing in itself. It's devastating, right? I keep saying that word because that's what it is. It's devastating. And so you have tourism that's are paving over certain things. They're rerouting water. They're taking fresh water for, pleasure and not even for drinkable water. And now, you have water quality issues when you're looking at the influence of the Navy, the U.S. Navy, which is probably one of the largest navies in the world, most powerful navies in the world. And, Hawaii has been, we have Pearl Harbor, you have a lot of different bases along the island of Hawaii. There's a lot of people who serve in the military and the Navy, and they are brave people. This is nothing against the people who serve, but the amount of contamination that the island of Oahu has faced it because of leaking jet fuel or leaking, I think it's PSAS, which is the ingredient that's part of the fire deterrent system, into their potable water, into their water quality, is unreal. It's not none. It's more than one time. And people are, have health defects, birth defects, health issues, mental health issues, physical health issues, and it just continues to happen. There's this, they focus on this one containment center. It's called Red Hill, and it's basically a jet fuel containment. It was built back into World War II era, where there's this thin lining that's supposed to protect from jet fuel leaking. However, there's 12 different barrels that hold up to 12.5 million gallons per barrel, per containment center, and that leaks every once in a while. And I think there was one time where they were talking about 21,000 gallons leaked into the water quality system. So people are smelling jet fuel in their homes as their taps are turned on. They're seeing the oil slicks on the top of their mugs as they're drinking this. They don't even realize, because how are you supposed to realize? Who thinks that there's going to be jet fuel in your water? Then they had to go to, they're fighting at stores to get better water, like bottled water and so forth. And you got to remember, a lot of the people who've lived there and have had generations live there have never had to worry about this before. And here you are, jet fuel in your water quality, affecting your children, affecting your unborn children, affecting your families, your elders in these societies that are just trying to live. They're just trying to maintain a good, healthy lifestyle. And you have jet fuel in your water quality more than once. I think they're talking about one. The major one was in 2021, maybe even earlier than that. Then there was one in 2022. It's just, there was, like I said, there was probably 3 or 4 incidences since 2016 where there's been the huge leakages of jet fuel, and then this PSAS or PFAS, whatever it's called. It's awful. Like I said, it's devastating to see this. And I think what happens is, if you can control the human aspect, like the tourism and how much they're allowed to use, how much water they're allowed to use. If you look at contamination and fines that have to do with contamination, and making sure that there's a better system involved to manage those containments and manage those areas where they're storing, potentially harmful chemicals, that if it gets into the water quality, that's a big problem. Making sure that management is in place, where there's regular auditors, that they're audited regularly, that there's places where, people are looking and making sure that it's at the containment and the health of that containment system is at the top notch, is at the best, where the military or whoever's involved in this has to pay top dollar to ensure that this Fuel is contained, and these chemicals are contained so that they do not leak out into. That would be a better management system, but that doesn't happen because they don't want to pay for those better management systems, and that's really what it comes down to. They don't want to have to pay for this, even though it comes down to the safety of the people who not only serve in the Navy, but also the people who live in Hawaii. These are just people who just want to live. It's their home. It's been their land and their family for centuries, and all of a sudden, it just comes, the military comes in and just does whatever they want, and they get away with whatever they want. And that just can't happen, right? So when we talk, I guess the whole point of this video is when we talk about the climate crisis and we talk about the impacts to not only the environment, because the environment's suffering from this too. I mean, you see reefs are always being bleached, especially when we're hitting records of heat every single month, and the length of number of days of heat that is at over 40 degrees Celsius that causes these mass bleachings are not, they don't seem to be going down the number of days. They seem to be increasing. That is a big problem. That is a huge, huge problem. So oftentimes we focus on those reefs being bleached, which is obviously it's still a big problem, but we often forget about the people who live locally, the people who are affected. We go over there, we travel, and we say, oh, this is such a beautiful land. It's so great. It's so amazing. And you hear people in Hawaii being like, don't come here. We are going through a water crisis. You're using all our water. Don't come here because you think you're going to support, the tourism, because the tourism doesn't support a lot of sort of the native population, the indigenous population, right? The native Hawaiians. It doesn't support them. It supports the businesses who don't even have headquarters in Hawaii. Or it might be giving jobs to certain people, but it doesn't support the island of Hawaii. It supports the businesses that are putting millions of dollars into building these areas, changing the game for Hawaii, and then taking that money and going to their headquarters somewhere in the West, whether it be in North America, whether it be in Europe, whether it be in Asia, who knows, right? There's a lot of different interests that are in Hawaii, that like businesses that benefit from these places, right? It's disappointing. It really is disappointing to hear that there's a water crisis on an island. I mean, the water is so important to islanders. Like I said, before climate change, before the Navy, before tourism, they just need water. They need water to sustain life. It's so important. And when we talk about ocean conservation, we rarely talk about the conservation of fresh water. There's about 3% of fresh water around the world. 20% of that is in the Great Lakes. And there's a good percentage of that that's locked up in, the glaciers, which are melting right now, which is going right into the ocean, diluting the ocean. Another problem that we're not going to go into today. You have to control for the factors that you can control right away. Contamination of water, like water quality and water quantity, you can control by making sure that everybody gets water, but also the people who don't need to use the water have to use it on a very, very limited basis. And that's better management, tougher laws, protect native Hawaiians, protect the people who live there, and not just the tourists that want to hang out and surf in a fresh body of water when there's a beautiful ocean right there that they can surf. So I wanted you to be aware of this story. It's gut-wrenching to watch, but I highly recommend that people watch this so that you understand the impact and the emotions that are going into the people who want to live there. One of the women who are on there mentioned a number of times she's heard so many people, it's like, if you don't like it, why don't you just leave? If you think your health is at risk, why don't you just leave? And she's like, I grew up here. This is my home. Why should I have to leave because other people are destroying the environment? I shouldn't have to leave and be displaced because I want to stay here. And many Hawaiians, from my understanding, have left. They've had to leave because of their health, and they've gone to North America. They've gone to like mainland America to work, but they're away from their homes. They're away from their culture. And that shouldn't have to be. They shouldn't have to make that decision just because it's a health reason. They should make that decision because they choose to leave on their own volition, not because, it's my health or nothing, or I may not have any land anymore because, it was all burnt away and, people are trying to buy it for cheap. And I can't afford to pay for it back, or I lose my land because of it. I can't afford to rebuild or whatever might go on when you're trying to look at a rebuild like that. That is the problem with a lot of tropical areas, a lot of places that are along the equatorial line or that are small in states, is you have this colonialism that people come in, they travel there, they build hotels, they build huge, massive homes, like billionaires are building huge, massive homes, and they privatize the land for those people, for those rich people who just enjoy it because they love the island of Hawaii. What about the people who it's their culture, right? What are the people it's ingrained in them because it's their place? And I want you to think about that as you watch this video. I'm going to put the link in the show notes. But also, if you have any comments or anything like that on this video, I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you're Native Hawaiian, I'd love to hear your thoughts even more about this water crisis and this climate crisis that you're going through, just because I would love to share your story. So please hit me up on Instagram at How to Protect the Ocean. And don't forget, if you want to find out more of these stories and what's happening around the ocean and what's happening around the world, in the ocean, out of the ocean, with people, sign up for their newsletter, speakupforblue.com/newsletter. That's speakupforblue.com/newsletter. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.